Here we go, guys. It is time to start Unit 3. Unit 3 is going to cover civil rights and civil liberties. This is really my favorite unit because we're getting to look at legal issues. We're getting to interpret the law and have arguments with each other and stuff. Now that we have studied the branches of government and what they do, and especially now that we've studied the Supreme Court and we understand how the Supreme Court operates, it's time for us to put ourselves in the seats of the justices on the Supreme Court and start to interpret some law. So I know hopefully a lot of you guys are thinking about futures in law school and things like that. And these next few weeks are going to be a very mini version of that. We're going to be looking at court cases. We're going to be looking at how the words of the laws get interpreted. And we're going to try to find that reasonable balance between, what are our individual rights and what are reasonable limits for the government to put on those rights. So today we're going to start with kind of a complicated legal process that we call selective incorporation. So our objective today, we are going to describe the process of selective incorporation. We're going to go through this term and what this means and everything, how it works and why it is important. And after that, we want to be able to explain how individual rights are protected by the Bill of Rights. So most of what we're going to be focusing on for the next couple weeks here are going to be dealing with the rights that are spelled out for you in the Bill of Rights and how those rights are protected from government interference. So our question today is going to be, how are people protected from the government? And so we're going to look at our first couple of court cases, and we're going to do our first little bit of interpreting a very small piece of the 14th Amendment. First up, we have to understand what civil liberties are. It's been a while since Unit 1, and we talked about civil liberties. So we're going to, first of all, define civil liberties and point out the civil liberties in the Constitution. So here, you see Congress in the background there. You see a large gathering of people protesting out in front of Congress. And so this is an example of one of our civil liberties, that we are protected from the government preventing peaceful assembly. So this demonstration occurring in front of the Capitol building is a peaceful demonstration against some action that the government has taken. That's one of our First Amendment rights. All right, first, let's make sure we are all on the same page about what exactly civil liberties are. So if I have to define civil liberties, what I'm going to tell you is that these are limits on what the government can do to you. All of the things that we call civil liberties are protections for the people from action that the government might take. So the way that these things are actually worded in the Constitution are that the government can't do this to you. The government can't do that to you. So these civil liberties are guaranteed by the words of the Constitution. We're going to be able to find these things in the Constitution, find these limits on the government. And these are things that are guaranteed to you and guaranteed to all citizens. We're going to find most of these in the Bill of Rights, so those first 10 amendments, but we're going to find a few in the Constitution. We're going to find a few in later amendments and all that. But the most important thing to remember here is that these are limits on what the government can do to you. Everything that we're going to talk about here, we're limiting the government's power to interfere with your rights. All right, so let's get started with the original Constitution. It's been a while since we talked about this, but remember, sometimes the AP test will describe the original Constitution, and what we mean is that this information is found only in the 7 articles. So this is the stuff that's included in the Constitution before a single amendment is added to the Constitution. So we can find all these things in Article 1, Article 6, and in Article 3. So first of these is that Congress cannot suspend the writ of habeas corpus. Now, the writ of habeas corpus means basically that there must be a reason for you to be detained and that you are made aware of this reason. So you must be informed of why the state is attempting to detain you. And this is usually in the form of like you are brought before a judge and informed of the charges against you in like a modern setting. So, for example, like if I were to be arrested right now, the police would come and detain me. And as long as like, I wasn't fighting them or anything like that, it would go something like, Kurt Rakestraw, you are under arrest for, right? They would inform me of my charges right there. I would be brought downtown before a judge and officially informed of my charges. And that just protects me from being detained for no reason at all. Like it's my right to know from the state why I am being detained. The second of these is that Congress cannot pass bills of attainder. Bills of attainder allow the state to punish you without a trial. And so this is not allowed by the Congress or by any other part of the government here. You cannot be punished without a trial. Also, the third one here, these are all in Article 1. These are limits on Congress. Congress cannot pass ex post facto law. An ex post facto law would allow the state to punish people for acts that occurred before the law was passed. So, like Congress can't define something as illegal today and then go back and punish people who were doing that same act a month ago. Congress is only allowed to pass laws and set punishments for things from this point forward. So you can't like make something illegal now and then go back and start detaining people that used to engage in this particular activity. So those are three important limits on Congress. The fourth civil liberty that we can find in the Constitution is a form of religious freedom. It is that we are not allowed to have religious tests for office. So in no version of running for office can the state have a requirement that you pass some sort of religious test or have any kind of religious requirements. That doesn't necessarily mean that the voters feel that way, and the voters might demand that a candidate, express a certain religious belief or something like that, but there can't be any limits imposed by the state on people running for office. So the state can't ban any particular religious groups from running for office. The state can't require you to, engage in any sort of religious activity or have any sort of religious knowledge in order to run for office. And then the last one is the trial by jury. This is guaranteed in the Articles of the Constitution. So trial by jury, you guys know that one pretty well. It just means that our fate in a criminal trial is going to be decided by a jury of our peers. And that is a right that is included in the original Constitution. So we don't have to find this later in the amendments. So these are all just in the Articles of the Constitution. Now let's look at what we'll find in the amendments. Okay, this is our first 5 amendments here. I have simplified these, and these are the parts that you want to make sure absolutely that you know. There will be like additional parts that we don't have to worry about, but I want to make sure that you know all of the parts that I'm going to list here. So we're going to end up going through a lot of these amendments in a lot of detail over the next few days. So we'll go through these pretty quickly. 5 parts in the First Amendment. You have a freedom of religion, a freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to assemble, and freedom to petition the government. So 5 important parts of the First Amendment there. We'll have to go through all 5 of those separately. The Second Amendment gives us the right to keep and bear arms. So another one that we'll get into the details there. The Third Amendment, the barely used, no quartering of troops. This was, of course, passed in the time of the Revolutionary War, so they had to ensure that there was protection from the people having to house the military and all that kind of stuff. But this will actually come up once or twice in the details that we're going to go through over the next few days. The Fourth Amendment, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 all deal with people that have been accused of committing a crime. And so now we're getting into rights of the accused here. The Fourth Amendment protects you from illegal searches by the state and illegal seizure of property by the state. So this is making sure that the state can't, obtain evidence against you in an unfair way. The Fifth Amendment includes the idea of due process, ensuring that all citizens are given fair treatment and that all citizens are prosecuted in the same manner, that this is the kind of thing that we're able to know and understand, and we can ensure that people are treated fairly and treated the same. The famous part of the Fifth Amendment, you guys may have heard people say, I plead the Fifth and all this kind of stuff. We're talking about no self-incrimination. The state cannot compel you to confess to any sort of criminal activity or to testify against yourself or to comment in any way that might lead to your own punishment by the state. Fifth Amendment also includes the idea of double jeopardy. You cannot be tried twice for the same crime. So the state, this is kind of unique in the United States, the state gets one attempt to convict you of a criminal offense. And this is why in a lot of cases the state might not actually charge people with the harshest possible crime and all this kind of stuff. The state only gets one chance to prosecute you for a crime, and so they have to make sure that they can win their case. And then the last aspect here doesn't really fit with the criminal procedures here, but eminent domain is included here, and that tells us that the state can take private property and convert it to public use. So like in the event that the state is doing something for the public good, like building a road or something like that, they may be able to just take part of your property. Now this is a limit because the state is required to compensate you here. So the state cannot take your property without compensation, but they have to compensate you fair value for what they take. Second half of the Bill of Rights, we got 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Number 6. So what's important in 6? There are lots of other parts of 6, but what we are going to deal with is that you have a right to a speedy and public trial. Both of those are kind of vague terms, so we'll get into the details there, figure out what exactly is speedy and what public means. And then you also have a right to counsel. So you are able to obtain the services of a lawyer so that they can be the legal experts to speak on your behalf. 7. This is an amendment that we will literally never use again after this second right here. This is the right to a jury in some civil trials. This doesn't matter. We don't deal with it ever again. 8th Amendment. There is no cruel or unusual punishment and no excessive bail. Now notice those 3 terms: cruel, unusual, and excessive. Also vague and not clearly defined. So we will have to get into the details there and figure out what is allowed, what's not allowed. 9th and 10th Amendments, these allow the Constitution and the Bill of Rights to be a little more flexible. One of the main reasons why it has lasted for 250 years here. The 9th Amendment says that there are rights to the people that are reserved or unenumerated. That means, we just made a list of 8 rights that you have, 8 civil liberties, 8 protections from the government. The 9th Amendment tells us those are not the only ones. So just because they are not written on this list does not mean that those are the only rights that you have that are protected from government interference. And 10th Amendment we talked about a lot back when we were doing federalism. If the Constitution doesn't give that power to the national government, those powers are reserved for the state governments. So there you go. That's our Bill of Rights. All of these are limits on the government's power. All right, there are other civil liberties that we will find in the rest of the amendments. Not all of them are civil liberties. They're not all limits on the government, but a few of these are limits on the government power, and therefore they protect individual people's rights. So the 13th Amendment is a pretty obvious example there. It abolishes slavery, so the state can't have laws that allow slavery and things like that. So this is a clear example of a limit on the power of the state that results in rights being protected for a variety of people. The 14th Amendment is another one. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about the 14th Amendment today and for the next few weeks. But this includes citizenship rights, so the state cannot deny citizenship to anybody born in the United States. Has equal protection under the law, so the state cannot discriminate against people. Also has the due process clause we're going to talk about today, so the state cannot take away your life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The 15th, 19th, 24th, and 26th Amendments we all know as they protect voting rights, but the way they're worded, they're actually limits on the state. So the 15th Amendment says that the state cannot deny the right to vote based on race or national origin or anything like that. So that's actually a limit on the state that results in more people being allowed to vote. The 19th Amendment, the same thing. The state cannot have voting requirements based upon gender. The 24th Amendment bans the state from using a poll tax before people are allowed to vote. And the 26th Amendment says that, the way we talk about it is it made the voting age 18, but what it actually says is that the states cannot make the voting age higher than 18. So 18 is the maximum age requirement for voting. Any state still has the right, if it chooses, to allow people younger than 18 to vote. They just can't set their required age above 18. So here's just a few here, 6 other amendments that limit the power of the national government and result in more individual rights for people. All right, there we go. Just a simple breakdown of what civil liberties are. This is going to be the first half of our unit. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about this, getting into all the details of all those different limits on state power. First thing we're going to do next is we're going to start to look at one of these important civil liberties, the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, and explain how that little clause changed the meaning of the Bill of Rights.